And we're
There's
live-ish.
a light. What?
Secret
Oh,
This is
live.
a soft open. It's
Time
soft.
place. There's a light.
It's soft
Burning
like the
in
13 Reasons Why toolkit.
fireplace. Oh my God.
There is a rhythm.
First of all, I love that song. And what you just did was sacrilegious, right? Don't just leave it be. Leave it be. Do that in the shower. Don't harm others. Do no harm. Didn't you take an oath? Maybe you didn't.
Inside, I'm secretly Susan Sarandon pretending to be in a musical every day.
It's not a bad place to be. It's not a bad place to be.
Susan Sarandon was really in the musical, though.
Mistakes me for Susan Sarandon.
And we should do Rocky Horror. We should do a Rocky Horror night for sure.
Are you serious? Again?
Yeah. You guys did it before I was on? No,
I've put them on, but
No,
I mean,
no, we did
no,
not
the
do it
show.
before.
We should do a Rocky
like a show.
A Rocky Horror show.
Oh, Rocky Horror SPSM.
Oh my gosh, speaking of Rocky Horror, and we're live. You've come into SPSM, the Suicide Prevention Social Media Chat. And speaking of the Rocky Horror Picture Show, we're going to be discussing 13 Reasons Why. And we're throwing in a bonus. We're going to be discussing incels, involuntary celibacy, and frightening things on the interwebs that we think lead to mass shootings and murder-suicides. Why would we do this? That's a great question. It's one that we ask ourselves. We ask ourselves that. I'm at Doc Foreman, your friendly neighborhood psychologist and suicidologist, here to help moderate this chat tonight. We are having the conversations that we hope you will be listening to during the week. If you are a suicide prevention stakeholder or someone interested in this topic. I have a bunch of fancy people with me tonight. Tony Wood, say hello to the people.
Hey, everybody. I'm Tony Wood. I'm the COO of Quantify. I'm the co-founder of SPSM, as well as a few other things, including the chair of the board of the American Association of Suicidology, suicidology.org. Joined today. We're just 340 some days until next year's conference in Denver, Colorado. Come see the Rocky Mountains and prevent suicide.
Maybe we should do Rocky Horror Picture Show in the Rocky Mountains.
I don't. We'll need some oxygen tanks, but we'll be fine.
We can do it. We can do it. But I want to be Frankenfurter. All right, Bart Andrews.
Hello, everybody out there in SPSM land. I'm so glad you're joining us tonight. We got a great show tonight. I love talking about 13 Reasons Why. We can't talk about 13 Reasons Why enough. Again, I'm Dr. Bart Andrews. You can reach me at Bart Andrews on Twitter because my Twitter handle is my real name, which is quite a privilege, I want to point out. I work at a groovy little crisis center in St. Louis, Missouri called Behavioral Health Response. I shout out to my boss, Pat Coleman, who's awesome, and all the BHR tweeps who are handling calls right now. And I'm really excited about the show tonight, and I want to hear from Chris Maxwell.
Hey, everybody. I'm Chris Maxwell, Communications Coordinator for the American Association of Suicidology. And for those of you who can't get enough of talking about 13 Reasons Why, we are having a Facebook Live event on the AAS Facebook page tomorrow at 3 p.m. Eastern. We've got an amazing panel. Like, our panel is great. Don't get me wrong. But we have a great panel tomorrow with Jonathan Singer and Jim Mazza. Yeah, Stan Collins.
Oh, a competent panel. That's what that means. Yeah.
Hold on. And then we've actually got a couple of the students who put together the 13 Reasons Why Not group. That was a really big deal in Michigan. So we've got some expert panelists, and then we also have some youth that can lend their perspective. So it'll be great. Join in. AAS Facebook page, 3 p.m. tomorrow.
And can you say that you're going to that event and shared that event with others? Like, what's the good way to do that so that you can let people in your feed know?
So we haven't really created an event for it, but we did put out a graphic reminder, an image that we posted on Friday. So you can find that and share that.
I want to do a big shout out to Amy Young, who is my good friend of many, many years. Who is joining us. I hope everything is doing well in Minnesota. We have Lena Hellman. We have, of course, Noreen, who tells me that I should not sing. I don't know where you would get that idea, Noreen. We have Travis here who wants Bart to high-five the silver palm behind him. And of course, we've got Marshman, who loves the I may have a thing for Susan Sarandon. We just have a whole bunch of people sort of popping in. So we're going to talk a little bit about 13 Reasons Why, but we want you to please attend the event. I may or may not have talked about Jim Mazza at a state conference explicitly over and over again, and maybe shared his personal contact information. So I just want you to know, Jim, that if you get a lot of calls with Louisiana area codes, that wasn't me. We're going to be talking about 13 Reasons Why because, of course, season 2 launched. And last year was a really difficult year. So let's do a little recap. So we did, I think, there was a crash off of my washing machine just right then. That was my laundry basket. So here is something that you should know. So last year we did a wonderful SPSM on 13 Reasons Why. And we had a panel of student filmmakers discussing their opinions. We were kind of all... It's not like we knew that 13 Reasons Why wasn't going to launch. We did know. It was that we're sort of all, it's a dialectic, right? We have mixed feelings. So some of our feelings are that it's great that people are talking about suicide. And some of our feelings are like, ooh, that's not the way we want people to talk about suicide because of graphic depictions of the suicide death and because of other things like help and peers and parents and adults largely being portrayed as incompetent or unreliable. And those being really, really serious. And also just sort of saying all these bad things happen, so of course somebody kills himself, when in fact suicide is a really complicated event. And we don't think that's why people kill themselves. And so, we had some really complicated reactions. At the same time, you don't want to piss off Netflix, and you do want to encourage people in the media to talk about suicide and use suicide as a topic. Not that anything seems to stop them. And so the question is, how did we engage with that without being a jerk, but also really standing up for what we know about sort of good ways in the media to address the topic. So we hemmed and hawed a bit, and the suicide prevention community maybe had a bit of delay in talking about it, us included, trying to figure out what the way was to really discuss this thoughtfully, which was bringing in student filmmakers who were producers of such content and also the target audience. And they were fabulous. You can go back and watch that. But now we have season 2 coming out. Chris, you are our season 2 resident expert. Tell us a little bit about what happens.
So I'm about halfway through at this point, and it's really just a progression. So they've taken a pretty safe approach, I think, initially with the first 5 episodes or so, where it's really just no pun intended, but a postmortem on the events at the school, the lawsuit that's happening because the parents have, or the mom in particular, has sued the school. But largely it's a exploration of the characters, each dealing with the traumatic events that happened in the first season, and in their own ways. And so there's a lot of, there are a lot of depictions of PTSD. There are a lot of depictions of recovery and what that looks like for folks. And so it's really, at this point, there's a couple of hints at what's to come later in the season, which I assume is going to be something along the lines of a school shooting or some sort of school based violence on the part of one of the characters. There are hints of escalation with this character, and so it's a pretty good bet that that's what's going to happen. In terms of the actual production, I've been cautiously impressed at the safeguards that they've put in place. They at the very beginning of the series, at the season, they have each of the main stars of the show give like a short 45-minute PSA on encouraging people to reach out if they need help or if they're in crisis, and to go to the 13 Reasons Why info website if they are looking for specific resources. And then at the end of every episode, there's a voiceover that encourages people to go to that website as well. So they're doing more. I think they're doing what they are willing to do and probably capable of doing without sacrificing the Hollywood aspect of what they're creating. So it is what it is, and I'll always want more. But that's what we get, and it's not bad. So.
It's not bad. And like definitely they moved towards something a little bit better. Could they have figured all that out season 1? Probably. I think Dan Reidenberg was in contact with them season 1, and I know that he was in contact with Netflix folks related to season 2. And of course, they did make those adjustments. That being said, they re-showed the scene, like the thing that we think is the most problematic. They did again.
No. Well, no. So this is the funny story, right? So I start what I think is the first episode of season 2.
What? Oh, what is it not?
No. So I start season 2, and I'm sitting there
once again. Wait,
Chris.
Wait. Chris. Once again, we've got evidence that somebody doesn't keep up with the polos, don't we?
Somebody has to read.
No, it's fine, April. We understand you're too busy for us. Go ahead, Chris. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
It makes for a great show.
I wanted to highlight that. It's fine.
Polo shame. So it was just stupid. It was my idiocy. So I start season 2, and about halfway through the episode, the violent, graphic suicide scene from season 1 happens, and I'm sitting there being like, "Are they going to show it again? Oh my god!" I'm freaking out. And then it clicks. I'm like, "Wait a second, this looks really familiar." And I go back, and it's actually the last episode of season 1. So I hadn't even started season 2 yet. So no,
that's awesome.
So it was just, I felt like a dumb.
So Bart, do you want to explain what the polos are? Speaking of social media phenomena.
Oh, let's talk about. So if you don't know about the Polo app, I love the Polo app. The Polo app is basically video texting. So instead of texting back words, I guess, or images, you actually text back video clips back and forth where you record yourself saying something, and then you can have group polo groups, like a chat group, but it's all video. And I have to say, I like the Polo a lot. It's a great way to hang out with folks. I enjoy it more than texting. What say you, the rest of the group?
I enjoy it more than texting as well. Like, I have to say, like, we can have a lot of conversations more quickly. You sort of hit play and just sort of listen to a conversation, like, with a through line. It's actually really nice. I'm afraid that it's going to be like blab and they'll take it away from me after we really like it, right? Marshman is saying Gabby Frost has been tweeting about 13 Reasons Why season 2. So he's tweeted out to Gabby. Gabby, I hope that you'll join us. I have to say, I am not the 13 Reasons Why target audience. And I tried watching it. Bill Schmitz came over and watched most of season 1 in my siesta sack in my house. And I had a really hard time. Like, it's like eating something that's too sweet or I just can't. But Tony, you had some really good commentary about the target audience.
I think it's interesting that all of us old people spend a lot of time talking about the implications of 13 Reasons Why. Chris has done a fine job in the upcoming, what are we calling those? Facebook Live events? Mm-hmm. I don't know what we're calling those.
Live stream events. I mean, if we don't say on Facebook Live, we'll still.
No, I mean, Chris has graphics for it. They say something.
Facebook Live event.
Facebook Live events. That's what of course I knew that.
God,
Chris did a good job. I didn't know that. Chris did a good job of getting some actual young people on that. But we, those of us in the suicide prevention community, by our nature, are not exactly spring chickens. So there's a big gap between us and the teen girl target market of this particular Netflix series. So what are the implications of our commentary and how we feel about it, and how much does that actually matter?
I know that my children often watch SPSM while making decisions about what to watch on Netflix and how to feel about it.
Yeah.
Sure. And there was also a toolkit that was released. We're going to talk a little bit about SAVE released a toolkit. And for those of you who don't know what SAVE is, Dan Reidenberg runs a not-for-profit called SAVE. He's also, I think, the CEO or the executive director of the National Council on Suicide Prevention. I think SAVE and the JED Foundation, and did someone else maybe, I can't remember, put together a toolkit on 13 Reasons Why that was a lot of bolted like discussion points and recommendations that vulnerable youth don't watch it. and that you watch with your kids and you talk with them about it. I do talk with my kids about things. I don't want to seem like a negligent parent. That being said, I'm not sure how many parents hit print and then sit down in the show with the study guide. That's not typically how Netflix is consumed. Art?
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine there are some parents out there that take a very structured approach to this sort of thing. And I do think it's really important that there's resources available that people, if a youth had a question, I think it's nice that people could Google this or look it up and have access to something, because the show can raise conversations and questions. And I think that it's nice for parents to have that tool. I find it hard to believe that parents are sitting down with the toolkit and watching the show with their kids. I would imagine a lot of kids don't want to watch the show with their parents. Some might. I think the other thing that I'm learning, if you didn't know this already, kids sit down and they gobble up media. So my daughter went through the show. I mean, just went through the show and is done, right? Before I was like, oh, you 13 Reasons Why 2 is out. And she's like, yeah, I watched it like the other day. It's like it's a past event for her, right? And she loved it, absolutely loved it. I think that she liked it better than season 1, actually. I do like the fact that there is support. I do like the fact that they certainly have built in the Lifeline number. I think that's a great thing to do. I think that's just a general awareness tool that is a wonderful thing. In terms of, have we ever done, are there any outcome studies on the efficacy of toolkits? I mean, has anybody actually looked at, we produce an awful lot of things, and I sometimes wonder, has anybody ever evaluated, are these things effective? And what about
Singer? I think Jonathan Singer got that paper done. He was planning to do it several years ago, and I think he did it, but I'm not sure. But as I recall, the discussion about the preliminaries on that weren't great.
So here, the story that I have that has stuck with me over the years, the federal government, I don't know if it was SAMHSA or not, but a large agency spent like $30 or $40 million developing this substance use awareness program for youth. They brought all these content experts in. I mean, they put real money behind this thing. And after spending a gazillion billion dollars on it in terms of real money, they had like 30,000 hits in the first year, all from adults. It was youth oriented, right? So I think that a lot of the times we put a lot of time and effort into these things, but I don't think that they have a whole lot of utility or get a lot of traction because we don't really get how people think or respond and how they're searching. And I don't know that we always know the best way to connect with folks. I think particularly if we're targeting youth, I think our messaging style for targeting youth tends to be really bad. I think we're not very good at it.
I want to check in with a couple of tweets. People are saying some really profound things. So shout out to Quentin. He says, he was like, I'm not necessarily demographic audience, but Quentin loved it. So I'm asking him a little bit more about what he liked about 13 Reasons Why. Jess Stolman Rainey, are parents supposed to know that youth are vulnerable? How? We are pretty good at missing that. Yes, there are probably the youth who are most vulnerable very likely do not have parental figures who are aware for lots of reasons, including that the youth may not let them be aware, but right, like that's sort of a problem. Parents often don't know that youth are vulnerable. It's just me, M. Kristen 73. Google is our friend for real stats. Those toolkits aren't really necessary. The importance was suicide and an opening to discuss it openly. So the issue is, even if 13 Reasons Why is not great, what it is it's a door we can walk through. It's a way we can have that discussion. But Marshman says, as someone who's just barely outside the targeted demographic, there are too many things wrong for the rights with this whole situation to outweigh it, which is pretty interesting. What do you guys think of some of those tweets, Tony?
I was just reading Travis Atkinson's tweets. I'm sorry. I was distracted.
Oh no, I haven't even got up that far. What did he say?
He was just saying that the faces I make SPSM a top 100 Twitter chat. I agree with him, of course. But I don't know what we were talking about, so that leaves me to toss it over to Bart Andrews, who I'm sure will save the dead air.
Yeah, I love Marshman. I love Marshman's honesty about this. I'm going to be very direct about this. I'm completely befuddled and mind blown that people are upset or worked up about 13 Reasons Why. I'm gonna go on a rant here. There's a couple of reasons. One, the amount of content that's suicide focused and that is much more atrocious and much more graphic and just much more just all those things is everywhere. But this show just got a lot of attention. And I think the reason it got a lot of attention is because their marketing, it was Netflix and it was original, and it clearly was focused at youth. And there was this clearly identified young female character that dies of suicide. I think that entire thing, just for whatever reason, just shattered people's safety net, right? Meanwhile, if you know what your kids are watching and the amount of content, both whether it is shows and things on YouTube or things they're reading, it's absolutely incredible how much suicide content is out there that makes this pale in comparison in terms of the graphic nature. I'm going to just be really upfront about this. The thing I really dislike about our culture right now is that there is this tremendous mob shaming thing that goes on. People love to be outraged and offended by things. It's the new thing. And I really do think shows like 13 Reasons Why allow people to get upset and feel like they're doing something that's really helpful. They can all join in on, 13 Reasons Why is unsafe and it's horrible and it's dangerous. And it's a way for them to join in and feel like they're doing suicide prevention and doing something useful when absolutely nothing is happening with all this pissing and moaning and groaning about how horrible the show is. So it's like it's the worst of all the worlds. There's no benefit that I see with this. We had people wanting it banned and censored the last time this came around. I'm so anti-censorship that when people start talking like that, I get really, really, really worked up because I think that's of all the, and that's really, let's be really clear about this. A lot of safe messaging folks, if they had their way, this stuff would be censored. You wouldn't be allowed to talk about suicide in a certain way without being arrested or having content shut down. I'm telling you what.
That being said, that being said, the way that they did the ratings and the way that they made content choices, they said, oh, this is for an older audience. And in fact, Netflix knows darn good and well that it was a much younger audience. And some of the things that they're depicting and showing, responsible adults know really aren't developmentally in the interest of the people that they were targeting. It really was more mature for the people they were clearly targeting with the show. And that does trouble me. So that's adults targeting young kids with very, very graphic messages about suicide that aren't developmentally appropriate. And that kind of does bug me as an adult and a psychologist and a mom.
You're a Tipper Gore fan, right? We lost this battle for crazy Tipper Gore and all the rating systems. All that should have been shut down way back in the 80s.
Bart. Ooh, ouch. Sorry.
What's the problem with Tipper Gore?
For those of you, for the octogenarians in the audience, Tipper Gore was Al Gore's wife.
Oh my God, I can't believe we have to say this.
And
we do.
Al Gore was vice president of the United States in 1920. If you recall.
No, that's not true.
She had a real big thing about, I believe it was
rock music.
Yeah,
rock music and lyrics. You got it.
He jumped on that bandwagon about 40 years late. But it was very popular, and so there was a rating system created for CDs.
So that's correct, and it was fought. And what's really interesting came from the left. What a shocker that restriction and restriction of civil liberties would come from the left. You don't hear about that ever. Oh my God!
What?
So
just a minute. Did you miss the entire Nixon administration?
Okay.
Are we going back to Nixon? Chris, jump in. Chris has got something to say, April. What do you got?
Okay, two things actually. When we transition over to Twitch, can we like make a theme song, like a little song, like a ditty that can intro Bart's rants?
Bart's rants. Okay,
so the second thing is, no, what Bart's talking about censorship. I mean, like, so when we see this happening, especially in the digital culture, it's way more prevalent now, but we have the Streisand effect go in full force.
Right? You love this thing. I do. Streisand effect. Talk about the Streisand effect. Speaking of Streisand, am I not a sweet singer? Keep going.
So I'll tweet out the wiki on that, or you can Google it or whatever. But basically, the Streisand effect is when you tell someone not to either do something, listen to something, look at something, it just increases the popularity of whatever that is. So you see this, I think it was Beyonce several years ago had a really terrible looking picture from one of her concerts just go completely viral. She goes on this tirade to try to get it taken off of the internet, and all it does is increase the downloads of this picture. So that's the kind of thing that you see happening in the internet age. And when it comes to binge watching or streaming these things, it's a very similar concept. If you tell them not to watch it, it's just going to make them want to watch it more. And if you tell them not to watch it, they won't watch it with you now. So and then the general sense of how much content is in one season. Like Bart, you were saying earlier, like there's no way that you can watch, you can't spend that much time on watching that whole season. That this is what we see. So when you encourage friends, or when you encourage parents to watch it with their kids, they have to sit there and watch 13 hours worth of binging in one little chunk. It's just not
of something for your children. And the whole point of TV was to not spend time with them.
Right.
I want to point out a couple of really great tweets. I know, that's my parenting. I was at Target. I bought my daughter sidewalk spray paint, sidewalk chalk. It's like an aerosol sidewalk chalk. And I said, if I get this for you, will you and your friend go outside and not speak to me for a couple of hours? Yeah, that's my parenting. Youth mental health. Wasn't prepared for the media calls last year about 13 reasons why on behalf of youth mental health. Now my response is that we wouldn't react to every societal or media issue if we had comprehensive mental health education from elementary to post-secondary. Like, we wouldn't have to react if people already knew this stuff. Good point. Jess Stolman Rainey, I cannot figure out why we care so much about 13 reasons why when compared to other content. I feel like everything I watch has on-screen suicides. It does. It turns out the world is unsafe, and maybe we could focus on that for a sec. I'm listening to an audiobook of the most frivolous variety, and the character's older brother, it's like a series, and the main character's older brother attempts suicide, and they talk him out of it, and he then goes on to recover and gets better, which I thought, well, like, that was handled well. But I remember, like, the reason I listen to frivolous literature is just to take a break from the very heavy things that we're thinking and talking about all the time every day. And it is hard to watch any media, read a book, or anything, even frivolously, where suicide doesn't come up. Jess makes a point. And then it's just me. I feel like the people who wanted it banned or censored are the ones not really paying attention to the world or kids around them. Kids nowadays are dealing with these types of issues. Thoughts, Bart?
Well, I think there's several things that are really important to highlight. Whether we talk about it or not, whether there's TV shows that reference this content or not, these things are being discussed and playing out in these young folks' lives no matter what. At a level that's really, in this day and age, quite concerning. There's no doubt that the level of suicidal ideation among our youth, the level of depression, the level of anxiety has increased dramatically in the last 8 to 10 years. Very little doubt about that when we look at the data. So whether we talk about this or not, or have shows about it or not, the youth are talking about this and being impacted about it. And when we act like these sorts of things are unsafe and dangerous to have TV shows about, when these TV shows speak to kids, there's kids who are watching the show and going, yeah, I can identify with that, or I kind of knew somebody going through that. If we try to shut that down, or we say that's unsafe or dangerous, we're really doing some mixed messaging that I think is particularly problematic in a lot of different ways. And Jess made a really important comment. It's one of my beefs as well. We fragilize people when we say that they're going to be triggered or impacted by these things. Right? And that we're already assuming that they can't handle this and you shouldn't watch it. I saw somebody had a list out there, somebody literally, and the level of support and love and dedication that went into this, but they went through the entire new season of 13 Reasons Why, and they listed every single potential triggering event line by line by line through every single episode so that you could avoid these things in case you're going to be triggered by it. I've got some really bad news for people. There's no evidence that trigger warnings are good in any way, shape, or form. People do them. There's no scientific evidence that says trigger warnings reduce people's anxiety or help them cope with anxiety. In fact, the research suggests that these sort of avoidance signals may actually strengthen anxiety and make people's anxiety worse, not better. Discuss.
So I'm going to say that one of the things is I'm just uncomfortable tweeting what I know is going to be disturbing content without saying warning. Just like I don't want to let a big fart off on public and not let everybody know, listen, y'all, I just had the beans. Like, I feel like that's just a courtesy, maybe, even if there's no evidence that it's making people safer. It's one of those things like, just so that you know this is about ready to happen. That being said, this is a really good, I did a tweet earlier today from the SPSM account about incels, and I put a link to what look at my face, look at my flashbulb eyes, what I feel like, and even Chris Maxwell was like, that's some very breathtaking commentary that you've just sent us, April.
Before we transition to the whole incel thing, which surely will take up the rest of the show, do we have an evidence-based thing to say about 13 Reasons Why? A single one? I mean, do we have anything to say about
I have one evidence-based thing to say, which is when you have things like this and they share lifeline numbers or things like that, we know that calls to crisis lines go up, which is great in that more people may get help, but which is not so great in that those places are often, staffed by volunteers and run on donations. And so people don't realize we're straining a system that is not adequately resourced.
Yeah,
and that is probably one thing.
Don't share their money with the lifeline.
Yeah, and that's a problem. So people think that the Lifeline is federally funded and we're all paying taxes for it. In fact, that's not how call centers are funded. And Netflix and Logic and all these people are not giving money to support the call center infrastructure for the resources that they are using for their trigger warnings. Bart.
I think that'd be really good to see. Is the notification of the Lifeline, the awareness of the Lifeline, are we seeing any spikes with Lifeline volume connected with 13 Reasons Why? I would love to see that data. That should be something that isn't too hard to find out and be a good thing to hear about. Yeah, Chris, you had something?
Guys, no, I mean, so the other thing is, like, the Lifeline number is not like prominently portrayed on each episode. It's just their website. So you have to go to their URL, and then they list a number of different resources. And I assume they've done that because the concept of having a number of resources on the screen at once would have just been a mangled mess. But so I mean, like, I want to make that clear. They're not like flashing the suicide lifeline.
Yeah, some people are talking about all the hoops you've got to go through to get to the resources.
So just to wrap this up, very little does the suicide prevention community have to say that is evidence-based about the impact of a television show that happens to be about one fictional individual and their death by suicide. Like, there's not much evidence base here. Like, we just don't know very much. And so basically what I'm trying to tell everybody that's listening is that there's going to be a lot of people spouting what I would consider to be horseshit about what they think is important about 13 Reasons Why, and why we need to do this and why you need to do that, and talk to your children and sit down and go through all this stuff with them. And there's no evidence for that at all. It might help, and I think that you as parents and mentors should do whatever you think is reasonable. That's your job to decide. But we don't have a lot of evidence to offer about what should be done and what shouldn't be done. So good luck.
Quentin pointed out on Twitter that more people search suicide and more people reached out to help, and they do that. And then we had some numbers about that, and that's the only data-driven numbers we have, which is really good. Marshall wanted to mention revenge suicides, and I really want to talk about the link between that. I want to talk about the Santa Fe shooting that just happened because, of course, and I want to talk a little bit about incels because I actually want to talk about stuff that I think is fairly unsettling. And I think that any reasonable person would be unsettled by the things that I was posting to our production crew's chat room today in preparation for the show today. So revenge suicides, I'm killing myself to like make a point. When we talk about these recent murder suicides and mass shootings, there seems to be an element of a revenge murder suicide. And I think that 13 Reasons Why I think sort of drifts in that territory that there's going to be a school shooting or something like that. One of the things that has impacted my world, and my daughter's school like called us during the middle of the day. There was a plumbing issue, and they were calling to inform us. And I swear to God, I thought, and I can't believe I thought this, because you think, oh, that's not going to happen here. And I thought, oh, there's been a shooting at her school. Like, that is something that I didn't realize I was worried about until I got a call at the wrong time of day, and it was a robocall. So we know that these events are becoming more common. And I know in the AAS listserv, people were talking about FBI data about these sort of mass shootings, and that like it's about 2/3 or 3/4 of the time the person has a history of suicide attempt and suicide risk in them, and that there is AAS has been doing press releases about the role of suicidality in murder suicide. That we think that it's playing an important role in the dynamics in these events. One of the things that people are talking about on social media are that a large number of these murder-suicide mass shooting events are perpetrated by people who are incels. And did you guys want me to explain that, or did anybody else want to jump in about what an incel is?
No, I think that you really need to be the one to explain incels, April. I think the three of us dudes met offline, and we all agreed that you were the best one to carry the incel message forward.
I get to talk about this. Yeah, absolutely. Because this is fairly, I think this is fairly difficult topic. So, so incel stands for involuntary celibacy. It was a term that was coined related to a chat room started by a woman named Alana in 1993. So if you guys remember, like 1993 would have been right about the time that I entered my first chat room on the interwebs. And so there were people who said, hey, I'm celibate and I don't want to be. And surely there are more people out there like me. And the internet allows us, social media allows us to talk to each other, whereas it would be really hard to do this. Sort of fast forward 25 years later, and the incel community is sort of notorious. The incel community, which was I think 40,000 subscribers strong on Reddit, had their subreddit banned. And they've moved to different places on the internet, and I'm sure I didn't do a Tor search. I'm sure have dark web activity where they're talking about their involuntary celibacy and what they think society should do about it. When they talk about these murder-suicides, some of the recent murder-suicide mass shooting events have been committed by people who identify as incels and who talk about killing people to show their rage at having their like sexual connection to others being thwarted. It's sort of that sort of Thomas Joyner sort of thwarted belongingness. These are people who want sexual relationships, and for reasons that people speculate about a lot. Whether it is how they look, mental illness, bad social skills, poor economy, whatever. These are people who want sex and can't get it. And they encourage violent murder-suicide on social media as a means of expressing their intense pain. And there has been over the weekend on the incel boards a lot of conversation about whether or not the Santa Fe shooter was in fact an incel. One of the things that is showing up in the social media feeds is that one of the people that he targeted was a girl who had rejected him, and he specifically picked and killed people who had rejected him, and that he had initially planned to die by suicide. And the incel community say he pussed out, which is of course a very sexually laden term that has all these judgments in it, but saying that he was a sissy for not being heroic enough to then ascend and die by suicide following the execution of these people who had rejected him. These incel social media communities are fairly disturbing. And I wondered, I think I had a chance. I didn't bore Tony to tears, but I had to go do my grocery shopping and stuff for the afternoon. But we were sort of looking at this. What did you guys think of some of the social media that I was showing with you in terms of things like they have whole subreddits called, or sub discussions called suicide fuel, things that content and ways of looking at the world related to not having access to sex that to help them in their resolution to kill themselves. Wait, did you see that whole section, Tony?
I didn't look at any of this stuff.
Oh yeah,
I find it terrifically off-putting.
Oh yeah, it's not fabulous.
But the thing that I should say is that I've been on the internet since 1990, maybe 5 if you count bulletin board systems. So I've seen a lot of this kind of stuff come and go over these many years of interneting. So I guess my point is that I think that this is just yet another emergent concentration of disenfranchised people that find each other, and they're in many cases righteous, but also misguided anger is distilled by constant obsession with whatever it is that they have decided is the injustice that is causing all of their issues. And it's unfortunate. You know, I don't know. I can't say that I've ever seen a great intervention for this. Of all the communities that I've seen come and go that are centered around hate speech and and every sort of terrible thing that you can possibly imagine, I can't really point at a thing except for, unfortunately, like when the people who operate the system turn out to be criminals and they get arrested and the whole system gets shut down, and so the groups all get spread out. That seems to work, but they just pop up again somewhere else. Perhaps Bart has something to say about like this overall trend of like the disenfranchised and people who find themselves on the edges of society, and they're really shouting into the ether their pain, but I don't know what you do about it.
Well, it's really interesting when I watch a lot of the threads on Twitter about this. So we're seeing folks right now on the thread who are saying, and this is just really painful. I don't want to talk about this. I can't really follow this.
It's talk about suicide every week, and they don't want to talk about it.
It's really interesting because I will tell you that there's a couple of different groups that I follow on Twitter, and some of the groups have said something along the lines of, and this is really interesting, we really should be talking about this. There's this group of people, it's predominantly young men, right? I think it's all young men from what I can tell, who are so disconnected and so distraught and so alienated that can't be good. This can't be good for anybody. And maybe we should start thinking about how we solve this problem. And here's what's really interesting. There's another group of people say that these people are losers, they're horrible people, and we shouldn't give two shits about them. And here's the funny thing. This is what's fascinating to me. It's the conservatives who are saying maybe we should try to understand what's going on here. And it's mostly on the left that are saying these are horrible people and we should just ridicule them and basically debase them. So we have a real challenge here because everybody has these things, these moral reactions to certain behaviors and certain clusters and traits, right? And this group evokes a tremendous amount of loathing from people, loathing that I understand fully.
They're recommending sexual redistribution, which is sort of institutionalized rape. So I mean, there's a reason why people are upset.
So here's the challenge we have. You can't just lock these folks up and cart them off somewhere, which there's lots of reasons why you can't do that. We have this group of people who are not connecting in any meaningful way with a culture, a community, something larger than themselves. I will tell you, one of the things that's really interesting, we talk about the progress we've made as a society, and we've done some wonderful things, but we've really lost a tremendous amount of community connection, and we have a lot of people that are not connected to anything meaningful in their lives, and we're surprised that we're ending up with these folks going in and shooting schools and doing really wacky stuff. Well, there's a cost to this progress that we're experiencing, and this is one of the byproducts that we're seeing. And we better be talking about what do we do about this, because they're not going away, and just having disdain for them and loathing and rejecting them outright isn't solving the problem. And so that's the big question. What do we do about this? And I think that's a really important thing to talk about.
And Youth Mental Health Canada said the van attack in Toronto with 10 dead, 8 of them were women, was done by somebody who was an incel. Disenfranchised males and male mental health are huge issues. And I think, I I've been looking more into the intellectual dark web, and Jordan Peterson have been sort of like if this is really has a lot of energy behind it, however I feel about the issues, I want to understand what's happening over here. And he said the only thing that he really regrets was calling the incel community a bunch of pathetic weasels. And everyone sort of understanding these are human beings too. They're people in pain. And she's talking about disenfranchised males and male mental health are huge issues. So if you have a bunch of men who are celibate, who don't want to be, and who are really disconnected, who really want to belong and can't, is that a social problem that we should be concerned about? And of course, I think we should be concerned about human suffering, but we should also be concerned about the fact that these are folks who are energizing each other to engage in murder-suicides as a way to manage their suffering because it impacts us.
They're clearly not doing it en masse because there's not that many of them in every year. Now, I don't want to I'm not encouraging it, but it's not. But though they talk about it endlessly, it's not happening in anywhere near the proportion of the way that it gets talked about on these discussion forums. Okay. Chris, you actually did read some of the stuff, and you were alarmed, right?
No, I refuse to read. I'm not going to be put on a list. But some of the,
you were like, Foreman can click on anything she wants, but I'm not fucking clicking on that, right?
But no, I mean,
disturbing content.
Yeah, some of even just the headlines of the links are really concerning. I mean, and it's all validation of really terrible behavior. Calling some of these people who commit these crimes saints. I would assume that they have that built-in inherent sense of martyrdom. There's just this elevation of behavior that is both morally wrong and goes against the societal norms. They lose the ability to like Bart and I had a conversation about morality and sociopathy and psychopaths, and that like there's just a lack of respect of the structure that holds together society. And it seems like these people have taken that and made it into a philosophy, but somehow perverted these other philosophies like economic inequality, and made it about their sexual the lack of sexual interactions. So they now have a sexual inequality, and they're making they're stealing that term of sexual redistribution and justifying it in a way that will make it a little bit easier for some to latch onto. So if you just say, oh, well, we aren't getting laid, so let's go rape people, you're going to get those terrible people who jump on the bandwagon. But if you label it as sexual redistribution, now you have people that are kind of in that like, oh, well, maybe that is a term that I can get behind because it's not so in your face and graphically terrible. I don't know.
Rin says, I hate the conversation notion that incels can't have sex. They can decide to work on their issues like the rest of us do. Hopefully strive towards finding communities and help in a broader way if they choose to. And Rin, I will definitely say many smart people have said, many smart people have said just what you have said. And I'm not saying I agree, but what I'm saying is the good thing about social media is if you want to know what they think, you can just go read. I think it's incel.me. Like they had to move to a whole new discussion board because they've been banned from most places. But if you want to understand how they think and feel, they get really upset about this. It's like somebody saying who has depression, if you just get up and do stuff, you wouldn't be depressed. And they're like, I've tried to get laid. I've done everything I know how to do to get sex, and I just can't. And they have a lot of reasons and a lot of real specialty language. So in these digital social media communities, they have cell is the suffix and they have a prefix. So mental cell for someone whose mental health issues prevent them. Some people believe it's their race. Some people believe it's their size. Some people believe it's their dicks. It's all sorts of things that people think are that they believe that they're inescapable, unchangeable barriers that keep them from being able to have sex. And so one of the things that's happened is that social media has allowed them to find each other and to create social norms and specialized language and belongingness around this issue. And there is strong encouragement in certain parts of this community and not the corners or the edges of this community, but the heart of this community, about murder suicide as a way of expressing to society that they're tired of being rejected, that someone will meet their needs, and that there is a belief that something's happened in society, that we have more men who are kicked out and forced to be on the fringes and not belonging somewhere, not being accepted somewhere, not having access. I mean, sex is part of it, but like there's a piece of sexuality that's about belongingness and acceptedness. And if I were celibate and being forced to be celibate, I might go mildly nuts. And I don't agree with a whole lot of, I mean, it's really disturbing what you read. But at the same time, I'm like, well, if there's a bunch of people who feel and think this way, there's got to be something there that makes sense, right? Bart?
I think it makes a lot of sense. And I think we have some real, I think this topic is going to challenge people in a lot of different ways. There's this interesting dynamic that occurs among social scientists, and where the incel discussion violates so many of the norms that they're going to have some challenges tackling this issue. We as a group have always been about, boy, when we see excessive violence or a lot of acting out behavior, it's because this group is being, in some way, their environment isn't nurturing them or providing them what they need, right? This is a common theme throughout social sciences that's been prevalent for about 50 years, that when there is excessive antisocial behavior, where people are not fitting in and they're committing crimes, that it's not the person, it's their environment. We need to be looking at the environment. Now we have the situation where, is it that these are just horrible, horrible young men and we just need to get rid of them? Or is there something going on in our environment that we really should be looking at? And I think it's always a combination of these things. Environment plays a role, lots of other things play a role. But one of the challenges that we have as a culture is that as we get more populated and more disconnected, and as our social structure used to be very solid. You guys have heard me talk about social equity before. Our social equity is becoming lower and lower and lower every year. And there are going to be consequences to this. These are the things that we're seeing. People are more disconnected. And when people start getting this disconnected, and particularly what we know about the adolescent brain, it isn't really good. The frontal lobes aren't fully developed, right? So we've got young men who have a lot more information about the world and see more about the world than they ever would have seen before because of the way technology works now, who are also experiencing things and not experiencing things, and that's having an impact on them, and their judgment is not good. And we're going to see this thing that we're seeing with these school shootings isn't going to go away. If you look at all of the school shootings, all of the young men that have been involved in some school-related shooting kind of fall into this category. Do we have any exceptions where they didn't fall into this category? They're all kind of fallen pretty squarely into this grouping. So
Paul Quinnett mentioned, and then Christopher Poe mentioned, and I want a big shout out to John Hill, who's been one of our regulars. He may or may not be on tonight, but was definitely on by email at the listserv, that we know that people have done research in these mass shootings and a history of suicidality and very significant thwarted belongingness, often in a sexual way, are two extremely common factors in folks who commit these sort of mass terroristic acts, these mass shootings, that are often murder-suicide. And so they're connected, and they're connected in a statistically much stronger way among the people who commit these acts than we see in the general population. It's worth asking about. The issue, of course, is we have several people responding, which is like, can we talk about rape culture? Can we talk about how wrong this is? And the issue isn't about whether or not the idea is right or wrong. The issue is, for me, I mean, clearly morally wrong. It's not ambiguous to me. To me, the issue is understanding what's driving this behavior and what can we do to help people who are hurting and reduce harm to society in the bargain, which seems to me to be very worthwhile, even if it means reading some very disturbing content and understanding a point of view that is really different from the ones that we have. And of course, they would not be thrilled with me wanting to understand. Like this would definitely, I think me even talking about it, that probably puts me up for being stalked or death threats, or, I mean, it's there, like, it would definitely make me a target. I don't think anyone would be really thrilled with me being curious, right?
Well, I think that it was really funny because you came up with this idea, and I think that in fact Tony and Chris and I don't know that we really responded in any way.
No,
there was no response.
You guys were like, "This is too scary."
Think about how unusual that is when we start talking about topics where literally the three of us, when you went on this thing about we should do this, Chris, Tony, and I just disappeared. There was like nothing. There was absolutely no response of any kind.
We ghosted the convo.
We did totally ghosted it.
So say more about why you would do that.
Because I can tell you, I've seen Ross Douthat wrote a column about this very issue. I'm a Ross Douthat fan, and I imagine that the folks on this convo that lean left are going to hate Ross Douthat because he's a conservative columnist. He wrote something along these very lines about this thing is going on. Maybe we should be talking about it. And the response on the internet was nothing short of vicious. Not only vicious towards those that are called incels, but for Ross for even having this meaningful column about it. I mean, it was the level of vitriol and threats and that came in his direction was intense. And if you don't know this, maybe you do know this, when on Twitter and on the social media, when people get enraged and the shaming mob starts, it gets ugly, and it gets ugly really, really fast. Right. And there, to me, there is no bigger form of cowardice than when people start glomming on these shame mobs, because to me, it's disgusting. I'm sick of it. I got no patience for it, no tolerance of any kind. But the level of input and feedback and the threats that he got, I was like, and we're going to bring this up on SPSM? Okay. And here we are, we're talking about it.
But I feel like we have some skills in sort of talking about something. And we talk about suicide all the time. We talk about painful, complicated stuff. Jess Dolman-Rainey and some of the other, and Travis Atkinson were like, who is beneath our compassion? Who is beneath us helping or preventing their suicide death? Who is that? Are these people is this finally the line? Are these folks who clearly are displaying a risk factor that's straight at the heart of one of our major theories on suicide, and that's right at the heart of our major theories on murder-suicide? Are these people so horrible that these are the people we can't talk about? This is the issue we have so much pain, shame, and fear about, or their behavior is so scary that like they could come after us, and so we can't possibly talk about this, even though it is happening all around us. And I thought, we talk about stuff all the time. Like, we can talk about this. If I get trolled, I get trolled, right?
Yeah. And if we get trolled along with you, that's fantastic too. I really love getting trolled. I've only been threatened to be murdered multiple times on Twitter, and each time it happens, I say, "Boy, that was fun. Thank you."
What a rewarding time for final thoughts.
Is it final thoughts? I usually get death threats at work, so I'm like, oh, they're not even at work, so meh. Okay, everyone. So this is final thoughts, and I really want to do the wrap up on this. Chris, I'm gonna let you go first.
I want to make sure that everyone's paying attention to John Ackerman's tweets. I know I talk about John, I think, every show, but he just has a really eloquent way of putting a lot of different ideas. And so he's talking about how it's really not, when we're looking at trying to control the conversation, or not control the conversation, but guide the conversation in an effective way, regardless of what we're talking about. We need to be not censoring this stuff, but helping people talk about things that they find difficult. So it's echoing what we're kind of talking about. He says, in interviews, I anticipate that folks will think we are shutting down the dialogue, but we really want to promote the discussion, coping, and life in a non-shaming way. So really this life worth living kind of concept, a hopeful concept, rather than, what you've done or what you've said is wrong. So I think that's a really, really important perspective, and we should all try to have that nuance to our responses, regardless of what the content is.
That is awesome, Chris. Bart. You're not Chris.
So there's so much. I'm proud of you, April. You've gotten a lot of positive comments about bringing this topic up and how well you did handling it. I think that this is one of the few things. not one of the few. It's one of the things that you do really well, and I think you're the right person to bring this topic to the forefront. I think we need to revisit it. I'm going to comment briefly because I love John Ackerman. We really need to do. I would love to do a more in-depth show about social media and safe messaging and the literature on contagion, because I think it's a grossly misunderstood topic. It's not hard and fast, and the way that it gets portrayed is that we really understand how all this works. And I'd love to have a more detailed conversation with John about this, because there's a lot of data out there and a lot of it's contradictory, yet we act like this is rock solid science. It's not. There's elements of it that, boy, look, we got this, and there's elements where you got the exact opposite over here. What's the difference between them? So I think it's really worth having a reasonable, intelligent conversation. I look for, maybe John would be willing to do that. I think he'd be perfect for it.
John.
Because I think it's important to because I think it's important to have a good conversation about. I tend to fall on one side, and I've looked at a lot of data and a lot of the studies, and other people feel the exact opposite. Reasonable, intelligent people differ on this, which kind of tells you that the science ain't settled. Is my 2 cents on it. Yeah. But I look forward to that conversation and learning, because I think John is awesome.
And
where can I find the Facebook Live tomorrow, Chris?
Is that your final thought?
Yep.
You're stealing my asshole.
The AAS Facebook page, 3 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Central, 1 p.m. Mountain Time, noon Pacific Time.
Can you tweet out something about that real quick so people can share?
Yeah.
Can you say something in your radio voice for everybody before we go?
With your big blue mic.
I can't wait for everybody to join us tomorrow on the 13 Reasons Why Facebook Live event on the AAS Facebook page.
Ooh, that was good. That was good.
That better be the opening of this sizzle reel.
Ooh, that was really good.
Final thoughts. We really tackle a lot of difficult and complex topics here on SPSM as we're wrapping up the end of season 5. We want you to remember, we're not shying away from those. As a matter of fact, we believe in this complicated world that we live in, there are only going to be more complex, painful, difficult topics about stuff that's hard to talk about. If it were easy to talk about, if it were an easy problem to solve, they wouldn't let us talk about it. Fancier people would have all of the media share, but here's this big hole that is shaped the size of the 10th leading cause of death, and we're going to drive right through it and have this conversation. Since Tony took my wrap up and my closing. Everybody, we're looking forward to seeing you next week on #SPSM. Thank you for spending another evening with us. Travis, we look forward to getting the invoice in the mail. Everyone, have a good evening.
Good night, everybody.